Goeiedag, good day, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world.
I've been looking around for salvation. I've been looking around for the truth. All around me I see frustration, and I looked all over till I found you. I sit and listen to your stories, and you're telling me, please don't worry. A lot in this world you should know, and love in life is where you should go. If you're looking for somewhere to go, if you're looking for someone to know, if you're looking for someone to guide you, then love in life will guide you. I know that life outside is so hard. There's a lot of things that can tear you apart. Sometimes feel lonely, but remember you're not the one and only. There's always someone there to help you, a helping hand to pull you through. There's only one thing you should do. Take my hand and join the Love and Laugh crew. If you're looking for somewhere to go, if you're looking for someone to know, if you're looking for someone to guide you, then let love and life guide you.
Goeienaand, good evening, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world. And just to let you know, most of my regulars on my live streams know this, but we have a theme song. It's actually been written for Loving Life, and we always start our live streams with a theme song now. So it does give people time to actually come in and join the live stream, because some people, only get alerted after a couple of minutes, and then they miss the whole introduction if we start straight away. Right. Let's get on to our subject tonight, and we've got Tiaan Theron joining us. He's a farmer in South Africa, and he's an outspoken white farmer who speaks out on Facebook about the situation facing farmers in South Africa and what is going on in the country. As a farmer, he sees firsthand what is happening on the farm, and that is the main subject of our discussion here tonight. First of all, let's watch a short video on his views on the ANC government. Please note the video is in Afrikaans and our discussion will be in English tonight. So here we go. I'll just get that on first and then we'll get Tiaan up.
Die belangrike ding om te onthou, vriende, is ten spyte van COVID-19 Die ANC is vir 26 jaar besig om op minderhede in hierdie land te trap, die blanke minderheid spesifiek. En COVID-19 gaan nie dit laat verdwyn nie. Dit gaan voortgaan. Ons sien dit dan nou dat die departement reeds binne in hierdie spesifieke fonds te midde van hierdie krisis bereid is om voort te gaan met sy rasse-diskriminerende beleidsmaatreëls. Wat 'n groot jammerte is, maar die belangrike ding vir ons as die burgery is om voort te gaan om hulle aan die kaak te stel en hierdie tipe van praktyke aan die groot klok te hang. Ons kan nie bekostig om nou ten spyte om nou midde hierdie krisis en met COVID-19 wat teen ons voordeur klop op te hou om hierdie ander virus, parasiet, wat ons land en sy mense vernietig, nou rustig te laat voortgaan daarmee nie. Ons moet aanhou om die druk op hulle te sit.
Okay, that gives you a bit of an idea on Tiaan's views about the ANC government, and clearly he's not happy. He's gatvol. And I can understand why. All right, let me get Tiaan on. We can start our conversation. Hi, Tiaan.
Good evening, Scott. Can you hear me?
I can indeed. You're set up.
If I want to see a picture of you, where must I? Must I push?
You won't, because my streaming software has captured my camera, so you just hear me. But we can hear you.
Okay.
We can hear you perfectly.
Okay, thanks.
Right. Now, you've made a bit of a name for yourself on Facebook, and that's fantastic. You're getting the message out there. But before we get into the main subject of tonight's live stream, which is about being on the farm and situation on the farm today, please tell us a bit about your life as a young boy growing up in South Africa.
Yeah, Scott, thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Good evening to you first, and also to your listeners and viewers. Yes, I grew up on a farm, the very same farm that I'm currently living on. And, as a young boy, we grew up and we had wonderful child life. I've got two brothers as well that lived with me, grew up with me, and as I've said, wonderful times. But as I also mentioned earlier, can you still hear me, Scott?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yep.
As I've mentioned earlier, Scott, and I want your viewers also to take note, just to give some context, Tiaan Theron is just an ordinary white South African farmer. He's no special or important man. He's not influential. He's not rich, and he's just an ordinary commercial farmer. So the opinions and the things that I share with you is in a personal capacity, and that's that.
Right, we understand that. That's fine. So tell us more about growing up. Did you go to university? Tell us a bit about that, through your life.
Yeah, we've had the wonderful opportunity to attend a primary school, a very small primary school in our local town, which is about 30 kilometers away from us. So we went there, and also the good thing about growing up under such circumstances is that there are certain principles which has been embedded in your life that helps you a lot in future. So I went to high school in Oudtshoorn, also a town in the region of 200 kilometers away. And after finishing matric, I came to farm with my dad. I started studying through UNISA, that's our university, the University of South Africa, distant learning. And where I studied BCom, I finished in 2006. And yes, after that, I was a farmer as I've been today.
Right. How long have you been farming now?
I've been farming since the year 2000. So this year it will be exactly 20 years. Yes.
Right. Okay. Now, you've obviously seen things change over the past 20 years, and we're going to be talking about that. And we're going to be talking specifically about, or to start with, the state of agriculture in South Africa today. Now, looking at the economy in South Africa, and in particular if we consider expropriation without compensation, that the threat of that hanging over farmers' heads, how is this impacting farmers when it comes to production? Are they taking a back step on this? I mean, what is the situation on the farm?
Yeah, Scott, the economy, the South African economy as a whole, one has to remember, was in big trouble even before this COVID pandemic arrived. We was, as a country, our economy was degraded to junk status by the big grading agencies.
By Moody's.
So we were in big trouble. Yeah, we were in big. We've seen very little economic growth. And ultimately, that was the result of poor government policies, old Soviet communist policies, which was forced upon civil society by the ruling ANC for more than 2.5 decades. And that resulted in the South African economy really struggling to stay afloat. So that necessarily impacted negatively on the agricultural economy as well. And specifically, the motion of expropriation without compensation, which was supported by Ramaphosa as president of the ANC in government, I think it was in February 2018. Now, any farming operation, and all the farmers watching this program will say that to you as well, is everything that a farmer does, he has a long-term outlook.
Right.
The whole farm is based on a long-term strategy. So, and in order for farmers to make long-term investments, they need certainty. So, with this whole notion of expropriation without compensation came along a lot of uncertainty, which necessarily meant that farmers didn't invest, they didn't put capital and the necessary capital into their farming operations as needed. So, and eventually we will see, in the medium to long run, we will see the negative impact of that uncertainty created by the expropriation without compensation policy.
So when you talk about the impact of that, what are you suggesting is going to happen?
Yeah, well, it's interesting times that we've seen the South African government announcing that they want to invest the 500 billion rand in the economy in the post-COVID era. They don't have that money, so they will eventually go out and try and borrow that money from international financiers such as the IMF and the World Bank. And alongside with those loans will come certain conditions, things such as the protection of the basic principle of property rights. So we are in very interesting times. There was a lot of initiatives, private initiatives, organized agriculture, political parties, civil rights groups, which was fighting off this notion of expropriation without compensation, and which was really pushing back very hard before this COVID pandemic arrived. And now, while we're in this crisis, things are starting to develop into a certain direction where commentators which will tell you that the ANC will use this opportunity to turn on the screws and let this expropriation thing happen quicker. And then there are others which will tell you if they do get finance from International Monetary Fund or the World Bank, they will eventually have to let that policy to let that and just simply not supporting it anymore.
Well, property rights are the whole basis of financing, right around the world. So when you start playing with them, you take away the whole basis of getting a loan from a bank and stuff like that. Now, you mentioned a bit earlier, you said that farmers are stopping investing, basically, in the future and for their farm. Is that going to have a huge impact on food security in South Africa?
Yeah, most definitely, Scott. It's definitely going to have an impact. One must remember, if you want to harvest a crop in 6 months' time, you are investing now. You have to go to a financier, get some finances to buy the necessary seed and the fertilizer, etc. And then you must start investing. Every crop is an investment itself. And if there's uncertainty, farmers just don't do make the necessary investments, such as planting crops, etc., etc. And then also another important thing to remember right now is that the consumer market, which is ultimately the ones who must produce that farmers produce, they are the ones who are going to get under enormous economic pressure in the next few months. There are some commentators which will tell you that we are going to lose in the region of 1 million jobs over the next 6 months in South Africa. That means a lot of money, consumer money, which is going to be out of the economic circle. So there might be food in the shops, but there won't be money to buy it. And we've already heard that there are many people, there's enough food to buy, but there aren't money in the hands and the purses of consumers. So that's also a big concern for farmers.
Right. We'll get to that in a short while. But getting back to production, I'm hearing that more and more farmers, commercial farmers, are now turning to sunflower seeds because that way they don't have theft. Apparently, if you've got a maize field, there's a lot of theft of the maize. Once it sort of comes to seeding. Are you finding that on the ground there?
Yeah, the region where I'm farming, we are in this specific area. We are basically we are sheep farmers, and so we are not really planting maize or those type of commodities. But yes, the criminality factor on maize farms, specifically around urban areas, has become a massive problem. Even within this time of lockdown, we have seen quite a spike in criminal activities, specifically theft on farms, food theft. I've heard that you have spoken to Ian Cameron earlier in one of your shows, and live streams. Maybe he touched on that as well, but yes, there's a definite rise in the rate of criminality, specifically when it comes to food.
Okay, well, one of the things that I did talk to Ian about last night was the farm protection groups and the move by Becky Selle to outlaw farm protection groups who... I think we just... Okay, we'll just... Tiaan's got a poor connection. We'll just see if he's coming back. Hi, Tiaan, you're back.
Hello, Scott.
Yeah, we lost you. I'll just repeat that.
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay. Yeah. It's the internet. It happens. Now, last night I was speaking to Ian from AfriForum, and one of the things we talked about was how the ANC government, under this lockdown, have outlawed farm protection groups. Because they've, Becky Selle has come out with this ruling. I mean, they're absolutely, they're nuts. They've got no logic. But how is that going to impact on the farmers if you can't actually protect? You're talking about the growing amount of theft, and having sheep. Apparently, there's a lot of livestock that's been stolen now as well.
Yeah. I just want to take one step back, and maybe Ian did it as well. You must remember that in many instances, with the lack of capacity in the midst of the South African police service, not only capacity but also lack of will, farmers and farming communities was forced to establish the necessary infrastructure to look after themselves, to look after their own farming operations. And so a lot of them are totally dependent structures to keep them safe, to keep their farms and their equipment and their livestock, to keep it safe and to safeguard it. But unfortunately, in the absence of those structures not being allowed to operate, it is causing massive problems, yes.
So have you had much in the way of stock theft on your farm?
Yeah, we do have stock theft from time to time. If you look at South Africa, I am farming in the you can call it the semi-desert district, the semi-desert areas of South Africa, more the western parts, the Karoo, the central Karoo,
Right.
and where we are, it's a very there it's a dry part of the country with very, very few people living in it, small towns, and because of urbanization, also we've seen a lot of farms being farmers that moved away to cities and to make a living there. So, but yes, I am in the fortunate position to say that in my specific case, the theft that's taking place is not at the scale as it is happening around the bigger metropolitan areas.
Right. Well, really, all these stock thieves should go and be pointed towards Ramaphosa's farm. I don't know if you heard, but the news was that he bought a bull. I think it's called an Akoli or something like that, from Uganda. He paid 500,000 rand for one bull. Now, clearly, he's got a fantastic beef farm. So, you know, these stock thieves should go there and have fun.
Yeah, it's a difficult one that, Scott, we also have to admit that in many cases where there's this big amounts of livestock being stolen, it is part of syndicates, and there's also a lot of in some instances, I won't say a lot, but in some instances there are also fellow farmers which is involved in the stock theft, specifically when it comes to syndicates. But in most cases, you know, I've said to you that I'm just an ordinary farmer, and I grew up on a farm. And my dad always told me that if there's a man walking on this farm roads for long distances with his wife and his children, and he's hungry, and he don't have something to eat, and his children is hungry and they don't have something to eat, and he walks by a sheep at the side of the road, and he decides that he's going to catch that sheep and he's going to slaughter it, and he's going to prepare the meat for his family to get fed, then my dad said we must not have a problem with that. Then it's fine. But what is really concerning is that the scale at which stock theft is taking place currently, specifically under this lockdown, is quite concerning.
Right, that's understandable. Now, I had emails come through today that there are parts of Pretoria now, talking about starving people. There are parts of Pretoria now where you go into a shopping mall and up to 8 young blacks will approach you and surround you and intimidate you into giving them money and food, and you know it's becoming more and more aggressive and assertive, this type of thuggery.
Yeah, well, that was predictable. There was a lot of commentators, and myself was one which was very skeptic when it came to this lockdown rules. And we know South Africa, Scott. We live here. We've been born and bred in this. The reality on the ground, and we said from the very beginning we can't duplicate the measures of Europe. South African in African context, there are way too many people who's living literally from what they own today and what they earn today.
Yeah.
And if that lifeline is going to be cut, it will happen. There is no such thing as a man lying down in the shadow of a maize plant, starving and silently going to his death without food to eat, but at the other side of the road is a Pick and Pay or Checkers or any other shop. He will revolt. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, well, that's starting to happen. Just talking about this area, because I mean we're sort of moving into an area that's rather disturbing. Food parcels, you know, that they hand out to people who are starving. The manner in which that's been done by the ANC is really, really, it's fishy, if I can put it that way, because apparently the officials who get the food parcels give them to their family and their friends, and very few actually go to starving people, which is about par for the course for the ANC. And the other aspect of this is that the white starving squatters are basically left out when the food parcels are delivered. Have you found that in your area, or do you have reports of that happening in your area?
Yeah, well, actually, I've heard of such incidents taking place. Not that I've expected anything else, with ANC councillors selling those parcels. By the way, they a lot of them are selling those parcels,
Wow.
making a business out of it. But yes, we've heard of those of those cases and those things happening with food parcels. And yet again, it is something which we must have expected. It is just, if you put something in the hands of the ANC or any of these structures, it will necessarily end up in corruption and mismanagement. It's just the way that those people, those organizations, the government as a whole is operating. There's nothing expected.
Right. Now, one of the biggest employers in South Africa in the past, or historically, was the farmers, with farm workers. Now, how has that been impacted, not just after the lockdown, but before the lockdown as well? I mean, what's happening to the number of laborers or people who work on the farms? Is that going down quite dramatically now?
Yeah, unfortunately, it does, Scott, for a few reasons. We've seen in South Africa the role of trade unions dramatically increasing in things such as labor laws, the minimum wages, making it ever more difficult for employees, and specifically farmers, to employ people. Now, the agricultural sector was in the past, and I believe still can be, a big employer of specifically low-skilled, unskilled people, which we do have millions of in South Africa.
Right.
But unfortunately, farmers opted to move away from the labor-intensive production processes because of government policy. More and more difficult for us to employ people and not to put yourself at risk.
Right. Now, one of the other things regarding employment is that there's talk that these really big commercial companies will be coming into parts of South Africa and developing farms. And they have equipment that's so advanced that they don't need workers. Everything is automated, even GPS, so you can just set your vehicle out and it just does everything without a driver. That's going to have a huge impact on the traditional farm worker, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. It already do. It has a massive impact. Mechanization is a reality in South Africa, and as I've said, because of the reasons mentioned. But farmers simply don't have other options or much other options, unless government are willing to come to the fore and make drastic structural changes in their policies. Then I still believe that there's a lot of commercial farmers still out there who can't really afford that type of capital investments in their farming operations, and who are more than willing to employ those people. But one must always also remember that the moment that you have started to change your operation, your farming operation, and made the necessary adjustments, then it's not that easy. And farmers won't be that willing to step back again and to get rid of those capital-intensive investments that they've made, and then start to employ unskilled workers again. So, but that is reality. Mechanization and bigger farm units with farmers coming together, putting their farms together in a corporation and buy these equipment. And start using it, making employment levels, forcing it down. It does happen, and it's a reality, and it is definitely not something which is good for rural South Africa. We've seen rural South Africa ending up in ash heaps and with our towns falling apart, infrastructure falling apart, and there's a lot of poverty in rural South Africa, and that will just get worse if we are not going to turn the tide on unemployment, which is caused by government policy.
Right. Now, you mentioned these little rural towns, and when I used to travel through South Africa, even in the early 2000s, you know, some of these little towns were just so beautiful, and they have been totally trashed by these ANC-run municipalities when it comes to services and things like that. And they used to importantly be like the heart and soul of the farming community. It's where you'd get together, and that's where you spend your time. Is that still happening, or is it changing because of the way the towns are today?
Yeah, well, it's difficult. It's difficult to sustain and maintain the towns, because a lot of the ultimate services which has been delivered traditionally by local governments have just disappeared, and so we are dependent on private initiatives. And that's the positive thing, Scott, is that the newer generation, which these communities, we grew up in the post-1994 era, so we didn't really know how did a well-functioning state enterprise and organ look like.
Right.
We a ANC-ruled town, which infrastructure is falling apart, a lot of debt. So we, as the young farmers in rural areas now, has started to come together and organizing ourselves and putting infrastructure and the necessary measures in place to deliver those services ourselves, which we traditionally would have received from government. I'm talking about things like schools for our children, and the list can go on, sporting and recreation facilities. Those are the type of things that the farming can maintain themselves, simply because there is no government which you can rely on. So, but there's a lot of the small towns which has, well, it's very sad, but it has they have just fallen apart, and I can't see how you're going to turn that around again.
Yeah, what you're actually saying is that this ANC government, you pay the taxes. Those taxes are supposed to be paid to actually provide you with services, but those services are missing in action. The money is getting looted by the ANC cadres, and the actual burden of actually providing that infrastructure today is put back on that little rural community. Otherwise, their town would just die.
Yeah, that's 100% correct. That's exactly what's happening, and so what you see in many instances is a form of fault, where a trust account is being set up, and the farmers, alongside with the people living in the small towns, donate their taxes to those trust accounts, and they start to deliver services out of those with making use of that funding. We've seen that happening in a few towns already, and I would like to believe that we will see more of that happening in the near future.
Okay, now do you think those towns are going to become rather like Orania, where they'll just basically have nothing to do with the councillors, the ANC councillors, and just simply have their own group who actually do everything in the town?
Yeah, that's difficult to say. There's a lot of things still to happen before we will reach that point. But I do think that self-management ultimately, that this communities all over South Africa that has been mismanaged by the ANC will ultimately take responsibility for their own fate. That's as simple as that. They won't. It is impossible to expect from any community to just sit back and see year in and year out how this bunch of robbers in the form of ANC councillors, how they loot and plunder once prosperous towns and communities, and So I do think that eventually we will end up there, but as I've said, I think there's still a lot of other important issues to come into play and be resolved before we will reach that point.
Right. Well, what I'm getting the sort of feeling of what's happening behind the scenes is that the general population in the townships, wherever they might be, are getting really annoyed with the ANC councillors, and a lot of these protests and the anger that you're seeing in little towns is actually directed not at the white community but at these people who are supposed to be running the towns. Now, surely there's an argument here for the white community in a town to approach the leaders in that township and say, hey, let's work together on this and get rid of these ANC councillors. And I think they've already done it in some places where they've actually set up through the courts, they've actually set up an independent body to run that council, which is outside the traditional council method. Are you familiar with those?
Yeah, I don't have first-hand experience when it comes to that, but yes, I do. I've heard about such community initiatives and compacts coming to life, and I believe that's the way forward. That's the way forward for the small towns. Is for the members of the community, the responsible members of the community to. But unfortunately, Scott, we have to accept and that. Or to acknowledge that there is currently a political system in South Africa in place which they call a democratic constitutional system.
It's a joke.
Therefore, next year, it's a joke. It's a massive joke. But next year, in 2021, there will be local government elections. And as far as the ANC concerned, if they won the election, they are the rulers of that town. And of that municipality. So as I've said, there's still a lot of things to happen, important shifts to be made if that self-management models. But there's also two realities. There's a de jure reality and a de facto reality. And I think the ANC councillors and the ANC as a political party may be in power for quite a time to come still in a de jure position. But in a de facto position, I think we will ultimately end up with local communities taking responsibility for themselves.
Right. But will they still be paying these councillors?
Yeah, well, that's the question. Whether the government itself will be in a position to pay those councillors. If local government is bankrupt and there aren't any money to pay, they are state employees. And if there's no money to pay them, then there's no money to pay them. As simple as that. And with the current situation of the tax revenue that will dramatically fall in the next within the next year or two, I do think that we might see some councillors struggling to get their pay at the end of the month.
Well, that I was just thinking that may be the way to get rid of the scum. Because the only reason they're in those jobs is because they're well-connected ANC, and they just want to pick up their check every month. Now, if you take away that check, they're not going to waste their time, pretending to be a councillor. Yeah,
and then of course you can imagine how the councillors and those who are willing to participate in this whole election processes, how that will change their. I mean, as simple as that. The robbers and the thugs out there who are in the game only for the money, they will just simply disappear.
Yeah. Okay, now let's move on to a different topic, and that is, how has the environment changed in South Africa during the time you've been farming?
Yeah, Scott. As I've said, I'm farming in the drier part of South Africa, the western part of South Africa, and as I've said also, that's a dry country, very very dry country, and it is not that easy to farm in South Africa, specifically because of that. And what we've seen, and there's a now I'm definitely not the typical lefty tree hugger greenie type, which believe the hardcore environmentalist, which believe in climate change, etc., etc.
Right.
But we have to also say to each other that what we have experienced over the past decade or so is that the western parts of South Africa definitely became drier. With there will be farmers out there that will tell you that they over the last 7 years they haven't received average in 1 year they haven't received the average rainfall. So and we've been going through this crippling drought. It has been a disaster drought for as I've said, in some areas for up to 7 years now. As we speak, there are districts in the more in the western, further western parts of the country, which still haven't received rain, and we are in May already with the winter lying ahead of us. So it is very concerning, the fact that there is such a large part of South Africa which haven't received our average rainfall, and farmers are really struggling. So it is challenging times as far as that concerned.
Yeah, I've got to say, I've seen a lot of videos about the drought and the state of livestock and stuff like that. And there's some farmlands now that they look just like a desert. You know, do you think that the desert is coming across South Africa?
Yeah, that's difficult to say, Scott, but it is definitely so that over the past 7 to 10 years we've seen the climate and the environment changing a lot, and we have seen we're facing a situation that the older generation just tells you they don't know about it. They didn't come across it ever before. They don't have any experience as far as how to manage this type of droughts. So yeah, I am a little bit. I don't want to tell you that the desert is going to cover the western parts of South Africa, but it is as I've said. Currently, there are a lot of which literally looks like a desert. Now, I suppose if something looks like a desert, you the desert as well.
Right. And as you say, after 7 years of drought, you can understand why it does. Now, I just want to address those watching. We've got well over 200 people watching at the moment. Now, just if you've got questions you'd like to ask Tiaan, please just put them into the side chat, and if the moderators can please just copy them for later. Okay, now let's move on to a different subject here. Under the ANC, there's all this talk about transformation in South Africa, you know, where everything has now got to be black owned, etc., etc., etc. Is that sort of situation being forced upon farmers in any way, this transformation?
Scott, unfortunately, it does. The agricultural sector has been subjected to this whole transformation program of the ANC as well, and specifically when it comes to ownership patterns. And it is the big problem with populist rhetoric is that it fits and suits the ANC to make use of ownership pattern figures, which is correct. We've seen many studies that took place over the past few years, which clearly indicates that it is not the case anymore that white are the sole owners of commercial farmland. But unfortunately, as I've said, the ANC politicians, opportunistic politicians, is not making use of statistics. They opt to still make use of statistics, which I don't know where they receive it, where they receive it from, but it fits their populist rhetoric. And what we have seen now, because of that, we've seen billions of rand being wasted over the past 2 decades within this transformation processes such as what's the process been called? But it comes down to farms being bought by government and then redistributed to their, in many instances, most instances, to their electorate. Now, what we've seen is a lot of corruption taking place within that processes, with, as I've said, billions of rands being stolen.
Right.
And those farms being given to people who are not necessarily capable of running those farming operations. And what have happened is that once profitable farming operations has been ruined, it has been plundered, it has been mismanaged, and eventually it went bankrupt. So what you will find today is that I think the government themselves admitted that in the region of 95 or 92% of all this redistribution initiatives with this upcoming farmers failed. The whole process of that those farming units is effectively out of production today. And that is, as I've said, also a big loss for agriculture, but also for the rural communities as a whole.
Right. Now, while we're talking about these policies that the government is actually pushing out there, which is so racist, you might or might not be aware that there's a growing school of thought that all these policies are not actually prepared by elected people, or the people who are actually advising the members of parliament. They're actually being put together by NGOs, non-government organizations, who have their own leftist views and policies. So while you have an ANC elected government, the actual policy is being driven by these NGOs. So you've got a complete breakdown, a disconnect between what people elect and the policies that are actually coming out. And for example, there's a Professor Ruth Hall. She is from that organization called PLAS. And it's known, it's well known that all the policies that come out regarding expropriation without compensation are actually put together by PLAS and then basically emailed to the relevant minister, who then just basically reads it out in Parliament. So it has absolutely nothing to do with something where they sit down and talk about it. There's this complete disconnect. And the disturbing factor here is that PLAS, and I had this discussion with, who was it? Just a couple of nights ago I had a discussion with someone about this, and he said that most of the money that PLAS get is from the Open Society Foundation, which is George Soros. So in effect, what's happening behind the scenes that people aren't aware of is that the policy that's been written in South Africa today is actually being written by Open Society Foundation, which is George Soros. And all the ANC are doing is rubber stamping it. Were you aware of that?
I can't really comment on that one. I don't know the dark hand which is operating behind the scenes. I don't know enough about the dark hand to really comment sensibly on in a sense one. But we have experienced firsthand, Scott, that the ANC and his leadership is in a certain sense on a railway track. They don't necessarily have the options and the ability to turn left and right where they want to. But we all know by now also that the ANC came to power not through their own deeds and their own struggle necessarily. They were guided and funded and powers out there in the international community. So it must not be a surprise to us that those very same powers now, after they have helped the ANC to come into power, that they now want to reap what they've sowed. It is their turn, and they will come to cash in ultimately. That is just simply the way politics is working.
Right. Now, when we talk about the ANC government, what do you think is the most damaging thing they've done to South Africa as far as any aspect of life is concerned.
Scott, the fact that they clung to the old communist ideology, it has been. You will find that in their founding documents called the Freedom Charter. The fact that they haven't left behind that communist roots of them, and that's in a broader sense. You will find that on every terrain in life. In South African society, where they will ultimately, eventually, at the end, after a lot of discussions and a lot of talking, what will the discourse that they will opt for will ultimately have a lot of communist ideology and goals built into it, and I think that's the big concern. And then you put on top of that the type of corruption that we have seen under the African National Congress, with, I think it is in the region of 1.5 trillion rand.
It's absolutely
that
amazing.
Been stolen, that has been stolen over the 10 years of Zuma, alongside with his ally in the form of Cyril Ramaphosa as his deputy. That was stolen in those years, 1.5 trillion rand. And that's what we know about. There's a lot of corruption taking place, money disappearing that we don't even know about. So I think that's the two aspects that I will point out and say it is the fact that in everything the ANC do, you will find a glimpse of communism on the one hand, and on the other hand, they will steal and they will plunder and they will rob day in and day. The moment when there's an opportunity to steal, they will grab that opportunity, and that's the two big issues I think that has crippled this country to the point where we are now.
Right, and don't you think having the South African Communist Party and COSATU as members, or like equal footing with the ANC, don't you think that's a huge problem?
Yeah, well, the SACP is well known for the fact that they are the think tank of the tripartite alliance, and most of, by far, the majority of the executives within the ANC are also members of the SACP, and serving on the executive of the SACP themselves. So yes, of course, they are born and bred hardcore communists, and that's one of the big reasons why you will not find any leader within the African National Congress on the very highest level and in the high ranks of the ANC, which are not a hardcore communist. They will just simply, they won't get there. They won't get up there and get the opportunity to lead the ANC if they are not well trained and equipped and embedded in the communist ideology.
Right.
Simple as that.
So what happened to the Rainbow Nation?
Yeah, well, the Rainbow Nation was, I think, as big as the Rugby World Cup in 1995. It started there and it ended there, unfortunately, for many. But for me, myself, my people around me, I was born and bred in a conservative home with a dad looking at this whole Rainbow Nation dream. And he taught us, and he always said that this just simply can't work. It will ultimately fail. It is a fabrication that is just not suitable for the South African context. We know the people of South Africa on ground level. We work with ordinary South Africans, black and brown and colored, and people of South Africa is thinking, and how they are coming together and how they work together. And the whole notion of a South African society being thrown together in a pot and being mixed up, it's just something which is not sustainable. And it is, that is the sad part of this leftist agenda, is the fact that they all hammer on this whole diversity thing. We are the South African society is this wonderful, diverse society with this wonderful, diverse cultures. But then eventually, when they must start ruling and start organizing this diverse society, they put them all together and they force them to become the same.
Yeah. And if anything, the people in the townships are much worse off than they were pre-1994.
Yeah, the important thing to look at is employment.
Yeah.
Um, you can tell him anything. You can tell him how wonderful his life is, and that he's a free man now. He can go anywhere, and he's not prohibited to go into certain shops or places or areas or spaces. But if he's hungry because you don't have a job, because you don't earn a living, then eventually your whole project will fall apart. And that's exactly what's happening in South Africa now. They tell the masses that they are free people, but we're sitting with an unemployment rate of 29%. Some statistics will tell you, it depends on the definition that you make use of, that we are rather in the region of 38%. And if we lose another 1 million jobs within the next 6 months, we will move up to a 50% unemployment, which is totally unsustainable. And we can't afford, as the people of South Africa, we won't survive that. It's as simple as that. Social unrest will ultimately turn this country upside down.
Right. Now, we're talking basically about the lockdown period because of COVID-19. Now, I've been saying for a while now on my channel that I think that what the ANC government have tried to do is to mimic what China did when the COVID virus came out. Now, things in China, or the living conditions in China, are very different to South Africa. The reason that worked in China, and there's lots of videos of it, they actually locked people into their apartments if they weren't self-isolating. I mean, they were absolutely brutal. Now, in South Africa, there's no way you can keep a social distance because you've got these townships where everybody's interacting. Khayelitsha right now, there's a huge breakout of coronavirus happening. It's sort of really knocking the figures in the Western Cape, and we're probably only seeing the tip of the iceberg. The reason I'm talking about this is that I question the reasoning for having a lockdown to try and, get the curve not to be so sharp, because when you allow people to go on taxis and that's a perfect petri dish for the coronavirus. When you have the situation in the townships where they're just not worrying about social distance, it's going to spread right through anyway. So rather than destroy the economy, why not just let people carry on with their lives as they normally did? Let this thing blow itself out in a couple of weeks, and then the economy is still okay. Because right now all they're doing is, as you're saying, they're just killing the economy.
Yeah, my view on that, on this specific issue, was that we must rather have a softer lockdown, a lockdown which is fit and which is suitable in an African context. That was my point of view from the very beginning, Scott. I've said that you can't model, or the Chinese model in the South African context. It will ultimately end up, and we've seen a few years ago the Marikana Massacre. I suppose that you still remember that.
Yes.
Where a lot of mine workers has been killed, and well, my opinion was that Cyril Ramaphosa has laid the table for his Marikana. But what have happened now, and I've been to town yesterday, and what is the footage that we see from informal settlements, is that life is, in a certain sense, going on in those settlements pretty much as normal.
Exactly.
The people they've just simply decided that they can't stick to the rules, and they, in a certain sense, proceed with their lives as normal as possible. But unfortunately, they don't work in those townships. They work outside those townships, so their income is very limited. But we've made a massive mistake to implement this hard lockdown in South Africa. That's as far as I'm concerned.
I totally agree.
I would have thought that I would have thought that we must have opted for a much softer lockdown with less rules, less regulations, and to lock down certain areas rather than houses, to lock down certain regions in order to keep people moving, and then do the screening, do the testing thing, make sure that people are healthy and that they work healthy, change their working conditions to more healthier conditions. But to go for this hardcore lockdown, I think it was a massive mistake, and we will pay that price for many generations to come still.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Now, I've got a question here from Boere Vegter. He says, Scott asked Tiaan whether he thinks the end of the ANC is near. I only want his personal opinion.
Yeah, well, I think what we must ask ourselves is how does the end of a struggle movement looks like? We've seen many struggle movements in Africa, and we have seen the countries that they run fall apart. And if we look at the country like Zimbabwe under the ZANU-PF, if we look at Angola under MPLA, if we look at Mozambique under Frelimo, those are all struggle movements, which the countries that they run has fall apart, and they have ripped those societies to pieces. But somewhere or another, they managed to cling onto power, and I think that will ultimately be the same for the ANC as well. They will, in certain areas within South Africa. One must remember, Scott, South Africa is a massive country. In a European context, we are more like a subcontinent than a itself. So I would say that the ANC will do everything in their power or anything necessary to stay in power, but they will only succeed within certain regions where their strongholds are. But there will definitely be parts of South Africa which will eventually took up self-responsibility and self-governance, and the ANC will not be interested in fighting them off or defending those areas, because they will simply don't have the capacity to do so. So that's my long-term grip on the ANC and their power struggle, but that they will just fall apart and we will wake up one morning and there won't be ANC anymore. I don't really can see that happening. Hello, Scott. Can you hear me?
Sorry, yeah, I had my mic off there. Yeah, now just adding a bit of meat to that. Could there be an anarchy in South Africa? Because it seems that the police have lost control of the communities they're supposed to manage, and now the communities are actually attacking the police. And when I spoke to Ian Cameron last night, he raised the point that even though Ramaphosa talked about deploying 70,000 troops, Ian said they only have the logistical expertise to actually deploy about 3,000. So those 70,000 they can't do anything with. Now, that's a tiny number of troops and a very small police force, and if there's anarchy in South Africa, it's just going to go way out of control.
Oh, well, we can expect that. I think Ian is a specialist in that field. I can't really comment on how the security situation will ultimately play out. But what I do know is that it will become impossible for the South African police service to push back the hungry waves that are going to break over them. You must remember, Scott, the South African police service, alongside with the National Defence Force, is nothing more than state-owned enterprises, and we have seen state-owned enterprises being mismanaged and plundered and led to bankruptcy over the past 20 years, with in a disastrous way. So why must we entertain ourselves with the idea that the South African police service will be this well-functioning force alongside with the defence force? They are poorly skilled, they are under-equipped, they are underfunded, and because they are ruled by the ANC. So yes, I can believe that they do have a lack of capacity, and but what the ultimate result of a lack of capacity of the security forces will be, I think a man like Ian will respond on that much more informed than I do.
Right. Now, getting back to the farming side of things, because we got off on a bit of a tangent there. How is production going to be affected in the future when it comes to farming?
Yeah, well, Scott, as I've said, it all depends on the levels of investment and the certainty that is created, the investment environment that has been created in the agricultural sector. We as South African farmers traditionally are very positive people. We believe in tomorrow. That's an absolute necessity when you want to farm in Africa. And most of us will eventually do what we love and what we believe we are called for, and that is to produce textiles. So we will keep on as long as possible, but we must remember we live in the modern era. Farmers are businessmen, and they have to make very important and sometimes difficult business decisions, investment decisions specifically. A lot of very highly skilled farmers with a lot of experience that has left South Africa already, and which is very unfortunate, but it does happen on a daily basis. And but production and food security is, as far as I'm concerned, is something that will be in future ever more become a bigger problem because of uncertainty, because of farmers not making the necessary investments, and if that climate is not going to change, then we will, with a growing population and with the whole of Southern Africa be dependent on the food production coming from South Africa, we will run into trouble in the near future.
Right. Okay. Now, on that same theme, where do you see the future role of agriculture in growing the economy?
Agriculture do have the potential to make a big contribution in this whole recovery phase of the South African economy. We do have the potential to employ a lot of people. We do have the potential to produce a lot of export commodities, which will earn foreign capital. We do have the potential to serve as a stabilizing factor in times of unrest. And I believe that the South African agricultural sector can play a massive role, a decisive role, actually, as we have did for many centuries in South Africa. But it is trying times, and we have to do a lot of hard work in order to keep our farmers positive and to keep their heads up and to keep them committed. But I do believe that the agricultural sector, if being managed well, and if our leadership in the agricultural sector is going to make the right decisions at the right time, we will ultimately contribute positively. I believe so.
Right. And on that same theme, what about the future role of the Afrikaners in stabilizing the country?
That's a very important question, Scott. The Afrikaners as a people is still making up a large portion of the farming community all over South Africa. And Afrikaners, as Afrikaners, do have a lot of experience in building and picking up and rising from the ashes. All through our history, we've been confronted with this type of issues. And as I've said previously, that I think we are part of a generation which can relate to the times of the post-Anglo-Boer War, where there were challenges such as the Great Depression, the Spanish flu, and everything that go along with those challenges. So I believe that Afrikaners is, in a certain sense, the moral compass of the broader South African society. And I would like, if you will allow me to, that I would like to give a message to my fellow farmers as well.
Sure.
If that can be in Afrikaans, it's fine.
Yeah, that's fine.
I would prefer to do that in Afrikaans. Is it fine with you?
Yeah, that's fine.
Thanks. Yeah. But before I do that, may I ask you, Scott, we are now at 8 minutes past 9. How long are you planning to continue with this conversation?
We'll be wrapping up, I'd say, in about the next 10 minutes. I've just seen if there are any further questions that people in the side chat would like to ask. I know you've got a lot to get back to tonight. Okay, I've got a question here from Property. Well, you fire away with your comment to the farmers, and then we'll get back. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, goed. Nee, thanks Scott. Thanks very much. Ja, ek wil dit graag in Afrikaans doen en baie dankie vir die geleentheid, Scott. Mede boere. Ek het dit nou vir Scott ook gesê en vir die paar van julle wat ingeskakel is wat na hierdie boodskap luister. Ons bevind onsself in tye wat soos ek gesê het vergelykbaar is met die oorlogjare in die vroeë 1900s. En ek wil vir julle dit as volg stel. Daar is 2 verantwoordelikhede op die huidige generasie Afrikaner boere. Die een is om kos te produseer vir hongermense. Dit doen ons vir meer as 3,5 eeue op hierdie Afrika kontinent. Ons gee kos vir hongermense. Daardie verantwoordelikheid mag ons nie ophou nakom. Ons moet voortgaan om dit te doen. Hou julle boerderybedrywighede in stand, plant julle oeste en oes julle oeste en voorsien kos vir hongermense. Die ander belangrike ding, verantwoordelikheid op in terme van die daarstel van sosiale stabiliteit. Ons as boere is die morele kompas van 'n falende staat. Ons moet 'n samelewing wat in duie stort optel uit die modderputte van kommunisme, soos wat ons voorgeslagte Suid-Afrika en sy mense opgetel het vanaf die ashope van Brittanje. Is dit ons werk om die Suid-Afrikaanse bevolking op te tel uit die modderputte van kommunisme. Kom ons doen dit met oorgawe, kom ons doen dit met trots, en kom ons doen dit in die geloof. Laat ons nie terugdeins voor die rotsblokke nie. Sterkte en vrede vir elke boerehuis. And then Scott, also, I want to thank you. You've said that you will be wrapping up in 10 minutes time, but just give me this opportunity as well to thank you and your personnel for this platform and for this initiative, and that for the fact that you invite us to tell the South African farmer story. Not always a glamorous and a story that is exciting, sometimes a very sad story, but thank you for giving us the opportunity. Thank you for listening, and may God bless you and the wonderful work that you do as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Tiaan. Now I've got 2 more questions for you that have just come through. Perhaps we can just deal with those, and then we'll wrap up the live stream. Property has asked Tiaan, did they stock up extra food in case the shops ran out or in a state of anarchy?
The South African food supply chain is a well-piled chain. There's quite a lot of food which has been piled up in various places in various forms. So I do think that in the short term there will be enough food for the people of South Africa. What is actually the major problem, Scott, is the issue. The fact that we must transport our produce to local markets, to metropolitan areas, and that's becoming a very big problem because of trucks being attacked, being looted. So that might become a major issue in future. Shops will probably run out of stock, not because there isn't any available, but because it is difficult to transport those products to the different urban areas.
Right. Now, the other question I've got is, does Tiaan support the idea of farmers employing poor, unemployed white people and thus solving 2 problems? Is any progress being made with this?
Yeah, of course, I'm a big supporter of that idea, and I myself have tried many times before to do exactly that, but that is also very challenging for various reasons. Scott, we must remember that the larger part of the white community in South Africa is an urbanized community. They live in cities and in big towns. They are highly skilled and qualified people in many instances, and they are not really immediately adaptable, capable of suiting in and fitting into the farming operation immediately. It is difficult in many instances. So, but yes, of course, that will help a lot, and we must, and I do try to motivate fellow farmers as well, specifically those who can afford to do that, to take their own people into and to employ their own people. I think it's important, and I think we can solve a lot of issues and problems by doing so.
Right. Now, if there are people who watch this video later who want to take up that sort of opportunity, can they go to like your Facebook page and put a comment in there and say, hey, this is my cell number, I'd like to go and work on a farm? Is that kind of opportunity available to people?
Yeah, they're more than welcome to do so, and I'll try to put them into contact if I can't help them myself. Of course, it's impossible for me to employ all the poor white people in South Africa tomorrow morning, but I will try to. The important thing that's currently happening, Scott, is that the networks amongst our people is getting stronger.
Right.
It is, and I think that's the important thing now, is to get people connected with other people which maybe can help them. So, of course, yeah, they're more than welcome.
Right. Okay. So, and your Facebook page is Tiaan Theron.
That's correct. Yeah.
So if they just type that, they'll see your little picture, and they'll be able to just put a comment in there. All right. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Look, I just want to say, Tiaan, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on our show tonight, or our live stream tonight. It's always good to speak to people on the ground because you get things firsthand, and there's no better factual information than that. And I just want to thank the moderators who've been looking after the side chat. Thanks, guys. You always do a fantastic job. And also for those people who've been watching this live stream, thank you for joining us. We have one pretty well every night now at 8 p.m. And we've got one tomorrow night, which is going to be very interesting. And in particular because it's a fellow who is from the Boere Legion. And I don't know if you heard, Tiaan, but Isaac van Zyl had a heart attack yesterday. And he's in hospital.
No, I didn't hear about it.
Yeah, so I've just been asking people to pray for him and hoping that he gets well soon. All right. Is there anything you'd like to just say in closing to those watching the video, or who might watch the video later, before we shut down?
Yeah, I think, Scott, the long and the short is that we've been caught up in trying times in South Africa, not only in South Africa, but all over the world. South Africa do have a lot of extra issues, but we will get through this. We will find ways, and we will develop means to get through this challenging times, and we will ultimately, as not only as farmers, not only as Afrikaners, but as South Africans in a broader sense, maybe, hopefully, we will get through this and we will rise again. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, fantastic. All right, guys, look, as I've just said, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm going to be shutting down the live stream now. And once again, thank you, Tiaan. Please all stay safe and have a good evening. Okay, bye for now.